Thank you, and welcome to the Institute of Politics at Harvard University, and particularly to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. There's a long tradition of this forum to have leaders of public policy issues, leaders of all sorts of issues from around the globe, come to address the Harvard community and the larger community, and then engage in questions and answers on those issues. And we're delighted today to be able to do that. We'll have a talk on an issue that I think we'll all agree is a very important issue, and some interesting ideas about where we can go next with those. And then we'll have some questions and answers. The issue will be on Homeland Security, and our leader to talk about those is former Governor Gilmore of Virginia, who has not only headed up the Gilmore Commission, but has headed up a group called the National Council of Readiness and Preparedness, which is working on these issues at the local level, with corporations, with community groups, with citizens, with the first responders who are likely to be there and responsible for the first 72 hours of work. We're very interested when leaders who can take these ideas and turn them into action are willing to come to Harvard. We at Harvard are quite interested in the analytics of those issues and the preparation of our students to work on these kinds of issues. So let me introduce the governor in a bit more detail, turn it over to him, and then we can get started. James S. Gilmore III is the former governor of Virginia and was in office when the Pentagon was attacked on September 11th, 2001. A former Army counterintelligence agent, he chaired the Congressional Gilmore Commission from 1999 to 2003 to assess America's terrorism response capabilities. Of the Gilmore Commission's 164 recommendations, 146 have been adopted by the Congress and the federal government. Mr. Gilmore is chairman of the National Council on Readiness and Preparedness, a nonprofit community-based grassroots organization to strengthen Homeland Security and provide forums to develop a national strategy that includes the first responders, small and large business, and the leaders of many communities throughout America. He is a partner at the Washington office of Kelly, Dry, and Warren, LLP, where he chairs the Homeland Security Practice Group and is president of USA Secure, a nonprofit Homeland Security Policy Institute. Governor.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for being here and being part of the Kennedy School Conference that's been put on for the last several days by the National Council on Readiness and Preparedness, and we call that NCORP for short. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to the best interests of this nation and its homeland security. We've made a lot of progress, I think, in the last couple of days on the essential challenge that is facing the nation today. And that, of course, is the challenge to our security here at home, to our homeland security. I certainly want to thank everybody at the John F. Kennedy School of Government here today for their hospitality and for their partnership and participation, and particularly want to thank former Governor Jim Geringer, who was here earlier for the last couple of days and was former Governor Geringer of Wyoming, and also the current Undersecretary of the Army, John Paul Woodley, for Public Works, who was here also leading some of the conference as well. My thanks go to the sponsors of this conference. We appreciate them very much. Advantus Strategies of Richmond, Virginia, Avaya, BAE Systems, Computer Associates, Digitech, Sprint, and Siemens Corporation, all companies that I think, while they do business, certainly in the defense field, you can do good work out of the corporate sector. And these people are doing good work on behalf of the people and helping NCORP, and I appreciate it very much. I also want to thank NCORP's major donors. NCORP is privately funded. And we have gotten some very substantial donors, and I want to certainly recognize one who actually is here today, and that is Patricia Cornwell, the best-selling author and my friend, who has made a major contribution to NCORP. Patricia, thank you very much for your support. We exist today in a time of great challenge for the security and even the lives of the American people. We have faced as Americans challenges before, to be sure. But today, we face a new threat by movements that use individuals to potentially infiltrate our communities and to strike at us by a stealth attack using modern weapons and technology to threaten our very homes and our families. The purpose, of course, of all of this is to infect the nation with that most serious threat of all to the United States. And that threat is the threat of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear in the minds of Americans. Fear of injury or death. Fear for the future. That is what the goal of the terrorist is. Now, in the opening session of this conference, Professor Makeling, Jerry Makeling here, noted that not a single one of the participants in this conference, the leaders that we invited here, many from many parts of the country, not one rated the state of preparedness of the United States today as excellent. Not one. In fact, a quarter of the attendees rated the state of our readiness as poor. Half of the conferees figured our status as fair. 25% is good, and not one as excellent. Excellence is missing. It's certainly in the minds of people who are leading in this community of Homeland Security. A comprehensive national plan where federal, state, and local officials, along with the private sector and the nonprofit community, have education, training, communication, and resources does not exist today. And we all have to play a role to make it exist. And we need a comprehensive plan and strategy that defines those roles so we can learn them and implement them and practice them. Now, this is how we go from where we are today to a nation where our preparedness can be defined as excellent. And that's what America deserves. They deserve excellence in our homeland security, and excellence has to be our national goal. The National Council on Readiness and Preparedness, NCORP, was established to address these kinds of challenges and to give a vehicle for Americans, again, to take charge of their own future instead of having enemies overseas to dictate the direction for us. We're here to develop a national model, a national template that can help communities augment and multiply their first responder capability by leveraging the resources and assets of the private sector and community organizations and citizens. We're here to begin this work of creating a national community of preparedness. Now, that's a tall order for a small, budding, beginning nonprofit organization. But it's a critical one. And frankly, folks, it won't happen unless we do it ourselves. And that is the reality. It is vitally important to the country's security that we work together to develop ways that communities can prepare for and respond to attack during the first 72 hours. So far we've always told ourselves that all we have to do is wait and they will come and rescue us. That's what we've been told and what we've told ourselves, whether it's an attack by a terrorist organization or whether it's a natural crisis. We need to know something. There is no they that's going to come and help us out on the first response. The reality is today we are they. And that's all there is. We are the ones that have to prepare and respond to a crisis in a way that allows our communities to survive until reinforcements can arrive. So I call today for a national movement led by and empowered by our first response community to make ready for any attack or catastrophe that might occur. Now, all of you have been here for 2 days. This is the third day working very hard to develop this template or model that can help communities plan for the first 72 hours. And thankfully, you have the expertise and the vision, and I thank you very much for the dedication of being here and working so hard and so many long hours. Now, my opportunity to lead in Homeland Security started about 6 years ago when I was asked to chair the advisory panel to assess domestic response capabilities for terrorism involving weapons of mass destruction. Well, that's quite a mouthful. So they shortened it up and they called it the Gilmore Commission. That was okay with me, but it's the only way that people could deal with it. But I would just like to give you some insight as to how all of this evolved and how it's gone forward. This commission was formed by the Congress in 1999. Now, I'd like everybody here, and everybody on this webcast for that matter, to think about where you were in 1999 and what you were thinking about and what your concerns were, either public or private. I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit. I'll bet you weren't thinking much about Homeland Security or terrorism. It wasn't Homeland Security. But Congress was uneasy, and the Clinton administration was uneasy. They had a concern that this country was not prepared for an attack, particularly involving weapons of mass destruction. So they created a 3-year commission and approached me about chairing the commission, hired the Rand Corporation in order to staff the commission. I felt that this task was a sacred trust. I was governor of the state of Virginia at the time, and I felt it was a sacred trust. And I was determined that the commission was not going to run just in a bipartisan manner, but in a nonpartisan manner. No politics, zero politics whatsoever. And I bet you all would agree with me that Homeland Security is too important for partisan politics. Now, maybe the best aspect of this commission, and actually it was the very best aspect, was the membership. These were not policy wonks from Washington, D.C., like you see in so many of these commissions. They were police, fire chiefs, rescue, emergency services, epidemiologists, public health experts, intelligence officials, retired general officers of the military. These were the people who were in the field, people who would have to actually do the response. They weren't so concerned about theories, they were concerned about what would actually work. But we never forgot for a minute that the first responders are the ones who are out there willing to risk their lives each and every day and will again in a time of crisis. In fact, we were fortunate to have one of the members of the commission here with us for the last couple of days, Ellen Embry of the Department of Defense, who was one of our sponsoring people for all those years on the commission. I'm also very pleased to let you all know that the vice chairman of the Gilmore Commission, George Forsman, formerly of the Office of Emergency Preparedness for the Commonwealth of Virginia, who has many years of field experience and working with people in the field, is now the Undersecretary of Preparedness for the Department of Homeland Security in Washington. Now, this is really a wonderful acknowledgement, I believe, of the Commission's work. And I can assure all of you all, we taught George everything that he knows. Now, in our first year of the Commission assessed the risk to the U.S. of a terrorist attack. And when it came to the idea of a conventional attack, a bomb specifically, or hijacking a plane or hijacking a train or something of this nature, our commission reported that the chances of that were highly probable inside the homeland of the United States. Now, there had already been, after all, World Trade Center 1. There had been bombing of the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. There had been the bombing of the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. There was the Oklahoma City bombing also. It was very clear to the members of the commission that America was in the crosshairs and that we would likely be attacked on our own soil at some time in the near future. We declared that and also said that the first step, the very first thing that had to be asked in such an instance was, who's in charge? You got to know, when the time comes to respond, who's in charge so that you can do things effectively. And we felt that there needed to be a national strategy for dealing with this threat, and we reported this. That was the year 1999. In the second year of the Commission, we reiterated the need for a national strategy. A year had passed. There was still no national strategy. And by the way, we didn't mean a federal strategy. We urged that a national strategy is not a federal strategy. It has to be federal, state, and local. Now, this is a pretty radical approach for a federal commission to say something like that, and it was pretty much ignored by all authorities everywhere and by the press, who considered Homeland Security a bit too theoretical and who turned their attention to more compelling issues, like Monica Lewinsky. Nevertheless, we proposed in our second year the creation of an office in the executive branch to develop and implement a national strategy. We suggested that there needed to be better coordination and information sharing among all of the federal intelligence agencies. So then we went to the third year of the commission in 2001. And we focused basically on 5 areas to try to fill it out as the commission was beginning to plan to leave. Empowering state and local governments and explaining how they should be fit into the national strategy. Bolstering the nation's public health care system so that if there happened to be a bioterrorism attack or some type of natural plague, that we would be prepared. Securing our critical infrastructure and particularly cyber assets and to protect against a cyber attack. Fourthly, clarifying the appropriate role of the military in Homeland Security. And the concern of the Commission was that if you're not doing your job right with preparing local responders, there would be no choice but to turn to the regular military. And the sense of the Commission was that that was highly dangerous and inappropriate from the standpoint of American history. And fifthly, strengthening immigration and border controls to restrict the movements of terrorists crossing our borders and operating within our borders. And that was the third year. Now, every year, our commission was directed by the statute to report on December the 15th. But that year, we wanted to impress people, so we decided we would finish early. So the first week of September, we finished our report, bundled it off to the printer, and then, of course, 1 week later, we had the 9/11 attack, an event that occurred that changed our lives and transformed our nation forever. Now, at the time of the 9/11 attack, I was governor of the state of Virginia. That morning in the governor's mansion, I watched the planes go into the towers of the World Trade Center, and just like you, I knew we were under an attack. I took immediate action that day. I picked up the phone and activated Virginia's Emergency Operations Center. I gave orders that any incident of gunfire anywhere in Virginia was to be reported immediately to the Central Operations Center. I placed the National Guard on alert. I went to my office over in the Capitol and then learned that the second state that was attacked that day was Virginia. Because after all, people don't think of it this way, but the Pentagon was the second strike, and the Pentagon is in Virginia. Who responded? Police, fire, rescue, emergency services, people out of Arlington Fire Department, Alexandria Fire Department. The incident commander was the fire chief of Arlington County. As time went on, more and more people flowed in and from surrounding areas and surrounding states. Later that morning, I received a call from the commander of the Atlantic Fleet notifying me of ship movements. I held press conferences several times that day addressing the people of Virginia, especially in the evening, a major address to the people of Virginia, just to reassure them that things were being handled to the greatest extent that they could be handled and trying to alleviate some of the uncertainty. I visited the Pentagon. I visited the injured in the hospitals of Northern Virginia. And these are the duties that state and local officials have in a time of crisis, such as those duties. Well, the September 11 attacks led to the extension of the commission for 2 more years, and we went forward, unfortunately, however, for those 2 years without one of our commission members. Ray Downey was a top fireman in the New York City Fire Department, and he was killed at the World Trade Center. So we lost one of the members of our commission. In that year, in the 4th year, we assessed the intelligence community. We recommended the creation of a national counterterrorism center so that there could be an exchange of information, which later became law. And we pointed out that in 2002, there was still no national strategy. In the 5th year, the final year, 2003, after a year of further thought, we were very concerned. We expressed concern, serious concern, that the urgency of Homeland Security was just not taking hold. We also began to have a serious concern about the protection of our civil liberties in the United States in a time of great peril and great danger and fear and anxiety. Now, ladies and gentlemen, frightened people will give up liberty for security. The enemy of liberty is fear. And I don't know about you, but I think we should never allow the actions of terrorists to cause us to surrender our commitment to liberty that makes us uniquely American, no matter what the fear or what the danger is. Now, most importantly, the fifth report outlined how essential the private sector and community organizations and citizens were to preparedness and response. We recognized that the government was just not large enough or had enough money from all taxpayers or employees to effectively prepare and respond, and that we had to get into the states and the communities and the private sector and leverage those assets. Folks, we are the they that we keep expecting to come and bail us out. There is no one to bail us out. Only we are they. Now, that was 2003. The focus of the nation on Homeland Security began on September the 11th, 2001. Now it is 2006. And where are we? In the state of preparations and in our state of mind. Much progress has been made, to be sure, by the faithful federal employees, especially at the Department of Homeland Security. They labor to exhaustion to try to make us safer. A lot of progress has been made in airline security and maritime security, and border protection, on the other hand, still remains ahead of us, something that still remains to be done. I think we can be proud of the local initiatives in the states and the localities who have exercised their own individual initiative, whether it's funded by the federal government or not. But the fact is that we are still not prepared, and we know we're not prepared. Now, there's a national response plan, to be sure, but it does not measure up to an operational plan for response. After 7 years, we still don't know who's in charge, as Hurricane Katrina demonstrated. Now, we've thrown national preparedness into a giant federal department, very difficult to manage and distracting from the central goal of preparation in every community. Our healthcare system has far to go, with the major surge capacity issues remaining unanswered. Our own Secretary of Health and Human Services just recently said about a potential avian flu outbreak, and I quote him, "Any community that fails to prepare with the expectation that the federal government will at the last moment be able to come to the rescue will be tragically wrong." How right he is, and how unprepared we are. In my opinion, the National Intelligence Strategy was improperly named. It should have been called the Federal Intelligence Strategy, because in the entire 32-page document, state and local governments are mentioned once. A recent testimony from the person who now holds the position of National Intelligence Director, I think his recent testimony is encouraging. But there's only one program manager in the federal government assigned to make sure that the federal government is properly sharing intelligence information with state and local authorities. And this country is just too big to be completely protected just from Washington, D.C. Hurricane Katrina demonstrated this clearly. Now, actually, in many ways, it was a perfect parallel to a terrorist attack. Perfect parallel. We knew it was coming. We saw it coming. It passed. And we all breathed a sigh of relief. And then came the surprise attack, if you will, the surprise. The levees broke and flooded the city. We couldn't evacuate the residents. We couldn't secure security in the streets. We couldn't get food and water to people stranded in places. Government really couldn't perform its most basic responsibility to ensure the security of the people that it serves. So regardless of whose responsibility it might have been, federal, state, or local, government just couldn't do this, at least not yet. Who did? charities like the Salvation Army, corporations like Walmart and Home Depot, and thousands of individual men and women, from police officers to ambulance drivers and concerned fellow citizens, who gave back to their community in a time of desperate need. In the hours that followed Katrina, it was the community that was responding, even though it was clear that there was not a clear plan about what they should do. But they were responding even when no one else could. But if the states and the communities are properly organized and incorporated into a comprehensive plan, we can make this country safe again. And we will. We will do this. Now, as Governor Geringer said the other night, every citizen is a first responder. At the moment of disaster or catastrophe or terror, we all become first responders. Everybody in this room has the capacity and the likelihood of being a first responder. We all then have to think about our roles ahead of time. We've got to make a plan. We have to prepare. We have to know how we're going to communicate and how our leaders will lead. We have to measure the threat levels. Well, I mean, that's fine, but as we know, the threat level is always high, right? That's what we've been seeing. What we ought to be doing is measuring the level of our preparedness, the level of our readiness in the various communities and states across the country. And this is something that I urge each citizen to start doing today. You are the first responders. Are you ready? America is not going to be ready until everyone can say that they have planned, prepared, are ready to take on their role as first respondent, and that it fits within a comprehensive plan led by the local communities and the local responders in a comprehensive and standardized way. Now, this INCORP conference is only the next step. We've done a lot of things. INCORP is actually no newcomer here to this effort. We don't always make all the news programs, but we've been around now for over a year, INCORP. We have visited firehouses in Tennessee and in Alabama. We've held an organizing conference in Washington, D.C. We expected 250 people from around the nation. We had 700 people show up from over 30 states, crying out for some sense of direction as to where they fit into the big picture. By the way, 30 mayors showed up. 30 mayors showed up to that conference in Washington, D.C., including the mayors of Fort Worth and Philadelphia, Baton Rouge, and Galveston. We've met with the Terrorism Task Force to develop information sharing and a program for doing that. So INCORP's been very busy. Now, this Ready America initiative that you have participated in can be more fully developed, I think, by this conference. And it's the start of such an effort. We recommend policy proposals that communities could begin to adopt tomorrow, and I know you've had a great deal of discussion. We urge the creation of an auxiliary responder corps of trained citizens prepared to report and assist the first responders in accordance with a plan. We urge the creation of crisis response officers in every business, including all in the private sector, in local response plans. We urge a national communications network to facilitate information as to risk and warning that is more laterally based, where people can access it and find out what the status is. Our goal is very simple, and that is to pull together the right people from all parts of the community, train them, put the systems in place to coordinate, and make sure they have the resources to respond. And when we do these things, then America will be ready, or at least as ready as we can be as a free country. Now, how do we bring America back from the abyss of anxiety that the terrorists have cast us down into? Well, I propose that we create a model of response for the first 72 hours. This template must be a blueprint of response, incorporating into a national network federal, state, and local responders, the private sector, and our community leaders. We've got to get to work on the local leadership to organize and train and exercise. Then we've got to communicate this to the American people. We have to tell the American people where we are and what we are doing, not merely to educate, but to alleviate some of this anxiety and fear, and to reassure our citizens that we are as ready as we can be and not to be afraid, to move away from fear and take on the other work on the agenda of this nation. So, I'll close and we'll get on to some questions and answers. But I'll close with a few questions that I want to ask everyone here and everyone watching this on the webpage. Who are we as Americans? What is the national character of America? Is it different now than it was before? Lately, I've been doing a lot of reading about the American Revolution. I really continue to be absolutely stunned, just amazed at how within that short period of time between the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, the decisions that we made, including in cities like this one where we're standing right now in Boston, we made a decision and to do what we did, to throw off a British army in our homeland and to face the danger to create a free nation here, the risk and the danger that was taken up. I mean, think about, if you will, the Battle of Trenton, not too far, I suppose, from here further down the coast, in which Washington crossed the Delaware to launch a surprise attack on the Hessians. Now, these soldiers marched out of camp on cold ground, some of them without shoes, with very little clothes, and they got into boats. And they crossed a river in winter with so many ice floes on the river that they had to push the ice away with poles just so that they could land those threadbare soldiers on the other side of that river. What was the national character then? And what is it now? Well, I will tell you that I believe that the tradition and character of the American people as free people is still here today. I don't believe that we have forgotten all the challenges that we faced, the Civil War and what we went through and the punishment of that war. I don't think that we've forgotten that we opened up the West and the dangers and risks involved. Can you imagine today Americans putting everything that they own into a wagon and crossing the prairies, crossing the Great Plains? Enduring risk is built into the American character. I believe we are prepared to face risks, and I believe that we're prepared to do that in order to remain a free people. But we can't be changed by the events of 9/11 and the anxiety flowing from it. We have to forge ahead with confidence and take actions that put the destiny of our country in our own hands. And in the end, the decision about whether or not the American character will remain will rest with me and will rest with you and with all you. And that is the simple truth. We can control our destiny, and we will do that while keeping America a beacon of liberty in the world. Thank you for the chance to be here with you today.
There are a few ground rules for Q&A here. So that everybody can hear, we need to speak from the microphones. We have a set of microphones here, one microphone there, one over there. We need people to stand up and go to the microphone, identify yourself before your question, and make it a question. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry.
Governor, I'm Tom Keene from BAE Systems, and I'd like to know, now that you said that question hasn't been answered, who's in charge, who should be in charge in a federal system with multiple sovereign agencies and multiple jurisdictions? Who should be in charge, and how do we get there in our system?
Yep, I'll answer that question this way. First of all, it's less important who's in charge than it is that we decide who's in charge. What you can't have is a catastrophe, a terrorist attack like we saw at the Pentagon, or like we saw at the World Trade Center, or even a natural disaster like we saw with Katrina, not knowing who's in charge. And I'm going to directly answer your question just in my view in just a minute, but it's very important to look back at Katrina for just a moment. Who was in charge of Katrina? Well, it probably really depended upon how things were going, didn't it? If things were going just great, I guess that all the various players would have wanted to have said that they were in charge. And when it wasn't going so great, they kept pushing things off. I happen to believe, by the way, that the people who needed to be in charge was the mayor and the governor. And it depends really upon what stage, and this is the direct answer, it depends on what stage of the game you're in. My personal experience at the Pentagon was that the local fire chief was in charge. He became the incident commander. He set up his command and control systems. He had his people in place, and he began to handle and manage the resources necessary to deal with that fire and those deaths and that catastrophes. As people came in order to remove people from the hospital, they came into his incident area. As federal people came in, they were subject to the local commander who was in charge there. There was no incident where the federal government would come into that incident, even at the Pentagon, and declare they were in charge, because they were not. But the most important point is to decide at what stage of the game you in fact begin to turn over proper authority. The most important point is to make sure we know when and where and who is actually in charge, because you can't have people fighting over that while people are dying. That is the key as to how we deal with that issue.
Hi, my name is Sunny Gettinger. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School, and I'm actually working on my thesis project this week, which is why I'm here on spring break, which is on engaging high-risk populations in individual preparedness. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on people whose resources are limited, both in time and in money, how communities can engage them in the actions of the activities.
What kind of people are you referring to? What do you mean?
Well, I'm
high-risk people. What do you mean? People in nursing homes? Is that what you mean?
Seniors, people with disabilities, and especially people who are single moms, low income, below the poverty level, no car. If they're worried about putting food on the table, how can we convince them that they need to be putting food away for the 72 hours?
You know, I was struck today by the extensive answers to a question like that we got from the mayor of Galveston and to the city manager of Galveston who were here. Galveston, as of course everybody knows, is a place where there's been a history of real devastation right there on the coast, and as a result, they're very attuned to this, and they're working all the time to try to deal with those kinds of issues. I actually was startled by the level of detail that they had worked into. I begin to wonder at what point you can't do it anymore when you're dealing with everything from oxygen for senior citizens to people who won't leave because of their pets and things like that. I mean, what do you do? And I think there is no answer other than pre-preparation. First thing you have to do, by the way, and this national debate has to go on, we have to ask ourselves, what is the actual responsibility of government here, and what's the responsibility of individuals themselves? We have this tendency here to say that somebody out there is going to come look after us, so we don't have to worry about this. That is the real failing of people, particularly people who are vulnerable. I think, if anything, they have a greater responsibility to make sure that they know what they're going to be able to do and how they're going to be able to do it, and then make sure that they understand what kind of success and help will be there from locals and states and federals and what will not. One thing we can't have is people that end up being surprised. But the easy answer and the direct answer, though, is nonetheless pre-planning. You have to begin to get the response plan in place. You have to begin to understand where the vulnerabilities are and how they're going to be accommodated in that first 72 hours. That's why we have formed InCorp, and that's why we held this conference here at the John F. Kennedy School, in order to begin to push forward the concept of meticulous planning in the first 72 hours. Because here's the point. If you're making it up as you go along, folks who are in the most vulnerable communities are going to get hurt the worst because they're not able to really respond in the same way that able-bodied people are. So the key is that we have to begin to set down the planning so that in a military-type fashion, not the military, but in a military-type fashion, you're able to actually begin to implement the planning in order to accommodate exactly those concerns. So I think your thesis will probably be a contribution. You should publish it. Sell it.
Good afternoon. My name's Henry Hammond. I'm a retired lawyer, and I was a federal prosecutor here in Boston for 8 years.
A lawyer and a prosecutor.
Yeah. And I'm wondering whether you think that the decision to put numerous agencies together in the Department of Homeland Security was a good decision. And if not, whether it would be a good idea to reverse it.
Let me try to hold on to the second part of that question and think about that while I'm answering the first. The Commission actually carefully considered the question of a Department of Homeland Security in its second year. That would have been the year 2000. In fact, we argued about it for a year. One thing we did with the commission, the advisory panel for the official panel for the Congress, was that nobody was more important than anybody else on that commission. Everybody had a chance to get in there and argue. We argued about this for a year. At the end of the year, the report, which you can read, they're all published on the webpage, concluded that we would not recommend a Department of Homeland Security. And the reason we did not was because in the year 2000, the Commission had a growing sense of urgency, a real anxiety. The more we learned about the prospects and about the situation of American preparedness, the more concerned we were that we had to hurry up and begin to get ready and to get preparedness in shape. We considered a department, and we rejected it. Why? Because we figured that it would be so elaborate, so big, and so involved, and so full of bureaucracy that it would become a very difficult thing to manage, a very difficult department to manage. And as a result of that, you'd be so worried about government employees and their pensions and where their offices were going to be and what their security was going to be that you wouldn't get around to doing the essential, necessary programs that need to be done, which is the coordination of federal, state, local people and private sector and community leaders on a broad-based, lateral basis across this nation to protect the nation. The department would be a distraction. That was the sense of what we recommended. What we did recommend was that there be an office in the president's office with a person who would have the delegated authority of the president, where the president put his hand on that person's shoulder and said, "You're going to make preparedness work, and I'm going to give you the authority, and I'm going to give you budgetary authority. So if any of the players in the government don't go along with the overall plan, you may injure them with their budgets." That was the proposal that we had. Actually, it began that way. Tom Ridge actually went into an office, a coordinating office in the White House, but he never got any budgetary authority. And as a result, time went by and it became more and more difficult to put together a comprehensive plan. Now I've talked for a while trying to evade the second part of the question. Because you asked the question, should we reverse it? The jury is out. I'll say the jury is out. I think it would be very hard now because it's in place. But I will say this. If we go much longer and we have not implemented a national coordinating plan to coordinate people into the federal, state, and local level, then I think we have to understand that private initiatives like InCorp will not be enough, and we have to keep doing it with federal help. And if they can't do it out of that kind of department, then we need to find another model. You asked me a direct question. I gave you a direct answer.
Governor Michael Kelly from the Battelle Memorial Institute. In your remarks, you discussed and mentioned the various organizations that have sprouted up in response to trying to deal with Homeland Security, and NCORP being another one of those. I would ask you to address what is truly different about NCORP and this approach, and why you think it will succeed.
It's different in at least two ways. I may think of some more here while I'm answering, but at least a couple of ways. The first is that it has a specific concept that grew out of the advisory panel. The advisory panel really recommended, among all the other recommendations, that we get down here and begin to leverage this local responder community that actually responds, and to create an overarching plan where everybody are equal partners in this. What we've sort of ended up with is a federal model that I'm not even sure that the feds like anymore. It's a federal model that says we've created a national department, so we're really in charge of all this. It's our responsibility entirely. So if anything goes wrong, it's the feds that are taking the hit, right? And certain governors and mayors can get off the hook because, after all, the feds said it was all their thing. I don't think that's a good model. Instead, InCorp is designed to push what we believe and what, after 5 years of analysis by the Commission, we think is a better model. And that is this genuine partnership that reaches right down into the communities, which we think is a better model. That's why InCorp is different. However, there are some people who are pushing for this. There's a citizen corps that's begun to be set up at the Department of Homeland Security. That fits the model. There are other approaches as well that are going on. The states and locals are exercising initiatives everywhere, but it's all kind of anecdotal, you know. It's all kind of not part of a comprehensive plan, which we at InCorp advocate. And secondly, InCorp doesn't intend to come in and try to direct anybody to do anything. InCorp is a private 501c3 in order to try to help the community create an organization of preparedness. But we're not going to, we don't have the authority to make anybody do anything. And I think that the goal of InCorp is to be an opening opportunity for people to come in and offer their ideas about what works and what doesn't work. Instead of telling somebody in some far-flung state or city someplace that this is the way you have to do it, we're prepared to do our duty and fulfill our responsibilities, which is to offer what we believe are the best practices and a legitimate program. But the goal here is to incorporate in people on a national basis. That's why it's called a National Council for Readiness and Preparedness. People are welcomed in to put forward good ideas. Best practices will emerge, and we will continue to drive forward on this idea of national preparedness.
I'm a little short for this, but Governor, I'm John Doesberg from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I've had the opportunity to participate in Chattanooga and Washington, D.C., and now here at Harvard in the John F. Kennedy School of Government. And my perspective on the three is that we started with ideas, we refined those ideas, and now we've brought some of those ideas down to realized principles that we can use in the nation as a whole. Where do you see this going?
You mean InCorp and its program? I think we have to continue to refine this, and then we have to get this down into a program, and we have to begin to offer more opportunities to local people everywhere in the country in order to initiate these matters. If you continue to put forward the right ideas and incorporate in a lot of people, you begin to do that which we saw at our national conference that was held at the Capitol Hilton. I think you were there. Where we, as I said, expected 250 people from around the country, and ended up with 700. Why is that? Because people are crying out and looking for an opportunity to participate. And I think that if InCorp affords that opportunity, then I believe that we will have, in fact, measurably helped the policy direction of the nation. Now, what are we going to do? I think we ought to continue to have regional conferences. This was held in Boston in order to give people from the Northeast an opportunity to readily come in and continue to push the ball forward up the path towards creation of a better program. We ought to do some more of these. We ought to get around the country and listen to some more people around the country. We ought to be doing this in the Northwest. We ought to be doing this in the Pacific Coast. We should do this in the South and try to get some ideas in here and create a template. Create a template, something where we can actually propose a blueprint. Now, if then government still doesn't respond with any type of real blueprint of response, then I think that they're pretty vulnerable. If nothing goes forward on that, and there is a sense of sort of being out there all by yourself, then I think politicians can become very vulnerable. So I think InCorp plays a public policy purpose.
Governor, a little follow-up. Each one of us that's here today has grown in some way. We've either learned or we've discussed and we've put ideas out there. What's your challenge to us? What do you want us individually to do as citizens of the United States when we leave out of here?
Thank you, John. And we also, by the way, very much appreciate the partnership and participation of Oak Ridge Labs. The fact they would come in and actually participate in a public-spirited way with no obligation of any kind is greatly appreciated because of the caliber of people that are incorporated into that laboratory. There are other good laboratories across the country also that are dealing on Homeland security issues. What's the challenge to you? Stick with this. The real problem I think we're facing today, the challenge we're facing today in the country, is that in the absence of an attack over these years, urgency begins to diminish. And it will be very easy, I think, for us to begin to think about other issues and other matters. But we know this. You have to get over a couple of hurdles here. You absolutely have to get the country to the best possible level of preparedness you can get. You cannot do that out of just a federal model. You have to have the states and the localities and the private sector and people like Oak Ridge and others engaged fully in this process. The leadership that we have seen in Tennessee and Alabama, the leadership we have seen in Washington at our national conference of 700, The leadership we have seen from you today continues to drive these issues forward and to refine them to the point where we can continue to get the word out. And that is going to help us, I think, keep the sense of necessity for motion going. Only then, when you reach a point where you know you're as ready as you can possibly be, can the American people begin to face a fundamental issue. And that fundamental issue is this. They really still think, or they're being suggested at some point, that we can reach a point of total preparedness. Oh, we give lip service, say, oh, we'll never really be prepared, but yet we conduct ourselves as though we're going to issue guarantees to people. We can't issue guarantees to people, but we can say this to the American people. We are as ready as we can be, and this is why, and this is how. So don't be as concerned about this. If the enemy attacks us, it will not bring down this republic. Tragic, to be sure, loss of life. No one wants a single solitary person to die anywhere. But they can't bring down this nation. And this is the message that we need to give to the people of the United States. And local leadership, such as the people here in this room, can help us do that, John. And you can too, and thank you.
We have time for about 2 more questions, maybe 3. Yes?
Good afternoon, Governor. Chris Mattoon, FCS Risk Mitigation Solutions. My question is preceded by a statement. We've seen great examples of the fortitude of faith-based organizations in the crisis response arena. How can we now, through NCORP, best harness during the planning and the training phases the great strength of the faith-based organizations?
Well, the strength of faith-based organizations is their capacity to communicate with people within their congregations and within their communities. And that is an asset to the country and an asset of communication. I actually spoke to someone from the African American community about a year ago who suggested that actually the churches in the African American community are the place of greatest trust within the community. And that would be a good vehicle. And as a private organization, of course, we have no impediment whatsoever in fact, harnessing those advantages and those strengths. And that's true, I think, of churches not just in the African American community, but everywhere as well. So this is a place where people in faith-based opportunities can, in fact, participate, and they can do so successfully. But they're not alone. We have community organizations everywhere that are in a position to work on those kinds of issues. It doesn't have to be just faith-based. It can be people in community organizations everywhere who can assign people to go and, in fact, work with the local responders. Someone, for example, who in the community organizations, faith-based or not, who in fact know who the police chief is. They know who the fire chief is. They know what the potentials are of an attack within the community. They know what their proper role would be at any particular time. They know how to communicate with people within their organizations, and they know how to make them fit into the big picture. NCORP's concept is it's not just that we're too federal-centric. It's not just that we need to deal with state and local responders. It is that we have to empower and challenge the entire community everywhere to understand that we're all in this together. And that's the big opportunity and the big advantage we see in all community organizations across the country.
1, 2, and then back up.
Governor, my name is Susan Bortz, and I currently coordinate municipal police, emergency medical services, and most currently Homeland Security programs at a community college in Western Pennsylvania. My questions to you are we as an NCORP group aggressively pursuing help from other organizations that might be a brother or sister to us, such as the American College of Forensic Examiners? And are we aggressively doing that so that we can learn from them? And from the national template point of view, if we can expect this template at some point in the future, should I, as the program coordinator at the community college, develop my own template, hoping that it will be adaptive enough to fit in with yours so that I don't have to wait to train my people?
Well, nobody's going to say that ours is necessarily going to be right either, particularly for your community. You may be in a position to we want to put forward a working plan, and then people can see whether it fits exactly into their community as well. But you want to create some sort of sense of standards and what would be an appropriate response. And we're drawing upon people out there in the communities to tell us what they need and what works as a good response template. I was, just to digress for just a moment, I was struck by the discussion that we had today. We actually, many of the people who lead InCorp came to this meeting figuring that the best thing to do would be to create stockpiles, pre-positioned stockpiles around the country on assets, physical assets necessary, medicines, bandages, vehicles and things to be in a position to prepare, and then the state affected could draw from it and put it back later. But the insight that we got from this group, for example, was that that's really not necessary in the modern world. That in fact, the idea of surge depots is really an organizational and management tool, that you can find out where these products are, how they're going to be transported, organize them, reach agreements so that when the challenge comes, the materials are available. I mean, I think that's just a great insight that we frankly didn't get until we came to this conference and listened to people across the country. We are partnering as a matter of routine in Corp. When we go out into the communities to talk about this, we are partnering with higher education organizations. We're using the higher education organizations as a vehicle in order to reach smart people who can help us out and work with us, just like what you are doing right now. I wouldn't wait for anything. I'd put forward your template, and I'd let us know about it so that we can learn from it, and then offer whether or not that's the best practice, and make some suggestions and work with you, not against you, with you. And I think that we'll all be better off. But the main point that I will point out is that what you're doing is exactly right. It's educational institutions working with police, fire, rescue, community organizations in order to get organized. And once you reach an agreement as to what that's going to be, then truly the community is better organized and better prepared than just simply waiting for someone else to come and bail you out. So congratulations.
Governor, I'm Don Whiting, Chief of Fire Rescues for the City of Oakland Park, Florida. As you know, the competition and the dwindling amount of Federal Fire Act grants are a concern to those of us that deliver services in smaller communities. Can you share with us what your expectations for future funding of that and other similar programs may be for us?
Well, I don't work for the federal government, so it's hard for me to assess what the future of those kinds of programs are. But I will urge this. We have suggested in our template, in our model, that the key leaders here are the fire chiefs and the police chiefs. We think that if we define their roles with clarity, and if we have them talking to each other and working together on a plan and working together with the other people from EMS in a completely respectful way, you will create a model that will cry out for funding, whether it's from the localities or the states or the federal government or a combination of all the above. If you put together a program that talks about a true response that can actually affect all the communities. What community are you from? Which particular part of Florida?
Broward County, Southeast Florida.
Broward County. How many counties are there in the United States of America? How many communities are there in the United States of America? What possible model of protection for this country can possibly exist other than a good, solid planning and preparation among the community leaders in fire, police, and rescue, supported by the community, supplemented by the community, organized and prepared, and giving information and a message to the people within their communities that they are there and they're a part of the overall solution. Now you can begin to talk about genuine preparedness. And what that's going to do is that's going to create a model that is going to create a real good argument for fire funding. You get a good plan in place, a good model, everybody shows how it's going to work, everybody's working together. What's government going to do? Ignore the funding? I don't think so. So that would be my proposal.
Last question. Hi, Governor. Pat Newman with the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm curious, you mentioned the potential dangers of the military and their use in emergency response. Can you give us a sense of how Responder Corps fits into that picture and how that might alleviate some of those dangers that you mentioned?
What a great last question, Jerry. You know, I could talk all day on that topic, and have, as a matter of fact, from time to time. I'm a veteran myself. I was in the United States Army in the early 70s. I'm very proud to be a veteran. I'm proud of the people who have served and continue to serve in the United States military. The question is one of appropriate role. There has been a great deal of discussion about how, in the absence of any type of system where we know who's in charge and we don't have a working plan and we have not empowered our police, fire, and rescue to execute such a plan, and chaos ensues, but suddenly, gee, there's no choice but to bring in the military. No choice. And I say to you that if we get to the point where every time the enemy can hit us and we are so disorganized that in order to create some stability in the community, we have to bring in the uniformed military, which might not even be in support of the law, by the way. If you bring in that kind of situation, then we have failed. We have failed. I believe there is an appropriate role for the military. They are well organized. They have a good model of response, probably the best in the world. The United States military is the most loyal people to the democracy and to the Republic of the United States. And they, I think, have a good role in training and preparedness and planning, and especially training. The ability to get out there and work with responders and explain what needs to be done and how you, in fact, organize people. And then I believe that the backup on that needs to be, after that, the National Guard. If you have to have more bodies, first of all, if you have to have more bodies, I would advocate Responder Corps. People who are prepared, trained, recruited in, people who have been former policemen, former fire, former emergency services, organized and planned, and they know where they're supposed to be and who they're supposed to take orders from. And if that isn't enough, then in fact, the National Guard ought to come in under the command of the governor. The governor commands the National Guard. And that's what should be done. And assuming they're still here, they ought to be able to be engaged and to put into the communities if in fact it gets to that kind of level. And I believe that specialty units of the United States military can probably make a major contribution, particularly, for example, in the unlikely event that we have a true weapon of mass destruction. I think the military people are almost indispensable because they're the only ones that have the training and the facilities and the resources to do that. However, I would resist firmly turning the streets of this nation over to the infantry. I think it's outside of the experience of this nation. It is dangerous in the long run to do that kind of thing, and I believe that we don't have to do it. And in fact, InCorp is about making it possible to never have to do that. And that is, I think, the goal and aspiration that we should reach for. As you see, I feel passionately about this. But I tell you, I love the military, but they have other things on their mind. And I think they should be tending to those things and let us, as a community, get ourselves organized and prepared to do the job. And that's what InCorp's all about, Jerry.
Thank you. Important ideas here. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Governor.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.